Okay, good evening. The time is now 6 p.m. and I call the work session to order. Will the city manager please provide a review of tonight's work session agenda?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. As published, we have 3 items in front of us this evening. The first, we are excited to hear from our delegates from the Civic Assembly process concerning the future uses from Hughes. So that will start us off this evening. So with that, Mayor, if you're good, I will turn it over to Rupa Venkatesh, our Assistant City Manager, to get things started and introduce our guests.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sorry, give me one moment while I share my screen for you. Okay, always good to start out with technical difficulties. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. We are super excited to be here tonight to finally present on our Civic Assembly recommendations. Joining us tonight is 3 of our Civic Assembly delegates, as well as 1 online, Peter Malarkey, Lucy Lee, Colin Russell, and Krista Chavera, who is joining us online. So you won't hear much from me, I promise, as I know we want to hear from our delegates, but I'll get us started. Here are the questions that we have for you tonight. If you have any questions about the process itself, we have Grace Taylor joining us online from Healthy Democracy. Of course, our delegates are here if you have any questions about their experiences or their recommendations. And then finally, we want to ask Council if you have any thoughts on next steps as it relates to your council priority to develop a Hughes site master plan during this council cycle. All right, look how far we've made it on the roadmap. One item that is not on this roadmap that we just figured out last week, and thank you to Colin Garfield and Lucy Lee, they will be presenting in a super issues meeting on June 23rd to boards and commissions. So we'll be sure to get that information out and that invite out to our boards and commissions as soon as possible. So this is the question that our Civic Assembly was tasked with. Informed by the diverse needs of our community, what use of the Hughes site will contribute most effectively to Fort Collins' long-term vitality and meet the requirements outlined in the 2021 ballot measure? They discussed this question over 2 weekends and 4 very full days. And over those 2 weekends, they learned together and gathered information, deliberated and discussed, and develop recommendations, and are finally here tonight to present those recommendations to you. And these next 3 slides, I'm not going to go over, but it gives a snapshot of our demographics. So quick summary, 15,000 postcards were sent out to randomly selected households, and then we stratified based on council district, age, housing status, educational attainment, household income. And our goal was to make sure that the Civic Assembly demographics, so that last column, matched as closely as possible to that second column, the percentage of Fort Collins population. And there is a typo on the screen, which I'll point out in a second. But just a caveat that I want to point out. So our assembly was only 20 people, so it's a smaller sample size, which makes it statistically harder to get a perfect match. But in some instances, stratification did prove to be effective in balancing out underrepresented groups and responses. So one example of that is that first row under age. The age group of 16 to 25, that accounts for 28% of our Fort Collins population. The 270 plus people that responded, that only accounted for 6.1%, but the stratification process helped us get closer to what we wanted to see to match our Fort Collins population. The typo that's on the screen is that last row under housing status. We actually had 1 person that was in the unhoused population, which represented 5% of the Civic Assembly. So those numbers are switched. All right, so let's get into the recommendations, and I will turn it over to Colin to kick us off.
Got it. First off, I want to thank you guys for having us. This is quite an honor. As we go through these slides, I tend to ramble on when I'm having a good time, so I made some notes that I'm going to read to you.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay.
Just kidding.
I'll identify the bullet point, and then I'll say what I've written here, and we'll get through it quick. With regard to diversity and experience, the Civic Assembly was a truly wonderful and powerful experience for many reasons, one of which being the diverse nature of the group. With each of the 20 delegates representing different demographics in our community, we varied in everything from age to experience, background, even income levels. With regard to disagreement and deliberation, with varied backgrounds, we all shared the same value of deliberating thoughtfully and respectfully. There were certainly points on which delegates disagreed, but there was never an argument, just calm, healthy discussion. Genuine curiosity and learning. When panelists described their vision for the Hughes site, all 20 of us were engaged, focused, interested. When a delegate had a point to vocalize, 19 other colleagues on the delegation listened with intent and an open mind. The importance of recommending and not deciding. Realizing that importance of distinguishing between deciding and recommending, all of the delegates recognized that this wasn't about our personal wants or desires. Our duty was for our city and its people. When considering and representing Fort Collins citizens, there were numerous examples of various delegates reminding the rest of us that this is indeed the priority, and several times we witnessed somebody backing an idea that they didn't necessarily agree with, but recognized that large groups in the community would support it, and this dynamic was very inspiring. Supermajority. When discussing the idea of a supermajority, this describes ideas that received 75% or higher in support from the delegation. The most prominent idea in this regard was the multi-use approach to the Hughes site. As I'm sure you've read in the final report, this includes a nature and learning center, a bike park, and a lot of priority put on the Indigenous people in our community. And with regard to the Indigenous people, we recommended by a vast majority that the Indigenous people should be included in whatever plans are due for the site. I have to change my page. With regard to natural habitats, we agreed the multi-use approach should be focused on restoring and preserving natural habitat on the site. Many of the panelists and organizations from whom we received presentation and with whom we did breakout sessions agreed that the best approach was to coordinate with each other to reach this goal. As is also shown in the final report, we recommend trails with educational signage, teaching our citizens about everything from the nature of the site to its storied history, among other educational efforts. With regard to outdoor education, we also recommend a community gathering space, which again could be a nature center or a bike park or even both. A community gathering space, something we agreed that whatever happens to that site should preserve the dark skies over it. We felt that this was important to the community. So whatever happens at that site, we are recommending that it should have low light, preserving those wonderful night skies. And finally, adjacent natural areas. As the site is flanked by 2 natural areas, we are recommending trails from this site connecting it to Maxwell and Pine Ridge. Lucy?
Thanks, Colin. So how did we arrive to the recommendation for multi-use? First and foremost, we thought that multi-use best addressed the 2021 ballot language that received the yes majority vote, as well as a multi-use site best serves the greatest number of people in our city and the greatest numbers of different communities and interest groups and visitors and the like. Because the site will need significant rehabilitation, we also thought it was best that a multi-use approach would help divide the cost and responsibility among different uses and groups, as well as serving as a win-win for the community and natural areas and connections, because those are some of the recommended multi-uses in our report. And Colin touched on, there were numerous groups that we heard from that were willing to collaborate and were eager to work together towards a multi-use vision for the site. Some of those groups are on the slides: Indigenous voices, educational groups, natural rehabilitation, bike usage, disc golf, and sledding for the residential community. And another important caveat is that because the site is so large and has so much potential, the Assembly did not think that a single use would best fit for the area for the aforementioned reasons. And I didn't know if Peter or Krista online had anything else that they wanted to add right now.
So I guess the one thing that I would say is that, and Lucy highlighted it, that it's 165 acres. And we recognize, even with some of those uses, at least having some, not conflict, but some heat at the interfaces, having that space and hearing from an expert in land use, they could be there, but separated by both by space and maybe berms and maybe natural vegetation. And so I thought, again, that was just another way to serve a wide swath of the Fort Collins community with the multiple uses. Yeah.
And lastly, some key reflections that the Assembly had about our time together. We were truly honored and grateful for this opportunity to serve on the city's first ever Civic Assembly. And I think all of us said yes to participating in something like this again. We learned so much, not just about each other because of our diverse backgrounds and experiences, but about the city itself and the history and the significance of the site, and what uses would best move the site forward with the city's vision for our community and maximizing the use of the site for everybody. Everyone came in with good faith and intentions for the site and for the community as a whole over both weekends that we met. And we just wanted to thank you again so much for this opportunity over the weekends and to speak with you now. Thank you.
And sorry, I got so flustered that I failed to recognize we have several other delegates in the audience right now that are here participating as well. So if you want to do a quick wave to council, just to recognize yourselves. Thank you all for being here. With that, we'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Oh, fantastic. So I can't let the moment go by without just sending my sincere appreciation and gratitude to all of you who got the postcard randomly, said, I'm in, and then got the call to serve. And what I'm so excited about is what you did and the recommendations, but really importantly too, is I feel like we have 20 democracy ambassadors out there now, and maybe future council members or boards and commissions, or think the idea of the experiencing the public process debate is humbling, and it's hard, and it's interesting, and I'm just thrilled that the city did this and council provided the funds and it was well done. But mostly I'm thrilled with your participation and your presentation here about how exciting it was. So I don't talk first, but I had to get in there. So sorry about that, council. Any questions from council? Comments? Melanie?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I got to speak to you guys on the last day of the assembly, and I wanted to echo, I was so impressed with the dialogue, the respect. It was clear. I came in on the tail end. It was clear how much hard work you all put in and how thoughtful. And I got teary hearing you all reflect on your experience. And I feel really proud that our organization pursued this process. And thank you to our staff who put a ton of work in, and folks in the community who supported it. It was a really neat, robust process. With regard to questions, I was going through the packet and was curious what kinds of conversations you might have had around any sort of permanent structures. For me, as I've been thinking about this, I like your idea of having a community gathering space, and I hear that it can be flexible. I'm a little nervous about the potential of building a permanent structure that might be more single use or a specialized kind of space. So I'm wondering if you guys talked about, if there were to be actual like buildings put on the site, what you envisioned for that.
Quite extensively, actually. We had presenters that had ideas that definitely involved a permanent structure. And I think that if there was a permanent structure to be installed there itself, it itself would be multi-use. For the purposes of education, wildlife rehabilitation, gathering center for the community. Also, it was agreed upon by most of us that whatever structure could potentially be installed there must aesthetically fit with the land and not be a sore thumb sticking out. So would leave that, what exactly would go into that structure, I think is no longer up to us, but we do see it as a multi-use structure. But that goes in accordance with the low lighting. If there was a structure to be there, it cannot inhibit the quality of the night sky. Do you want to say something?
I guess the one thing that I remember towards the end, as we were working towards our formal or final kind of recommendations, was one of the city staff pointed out for us to think about function as opposed to lobbyist group, or not to be harsh, but advocate group. And I think that was one of the reasons that maybe the recommendation seemed a little softer than it should be the Raptor Center, or it should be a bike park like Valmont. It was more what function would serve the citizens. And really good question. And we did talk about that in that northeast corner, which is adjacent to the neighborhood, there's both a positive and negative of that. It would soften the fact that's some more built environment, but it's close to a built environment. But it's also then maybe impacting that neighborhood, which may not be fair. And that's why we have all these smart people to work on figuring out the best way.
Look at me.
I also wanted to add that a space, I think, could mean a building, but it could also mean something like a shaded structure and some picnic tables if there's a park there someday and kids want to have a birthday party, if there's a park there, just somewhere for the community to gather. I don't think it needs to be confined to just a building. A space could mean a lot of different things, I think, is why we were, like Peter was saying, nebulous with some of the language.
Can I jump in one more time? One of the things is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when we were talking about the gathering space, that was more for like an Indigenous ceremony or some sort of a presentation speaker. And then maybe the constructive facility might be the wildlife rehab, and that might also be where the Indigenous history area would be, and that might be a building, might not. So I think it's worth distinguishing between those two. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yeah, to piggyback what you said, we were encouraged to not think about who uses the land, but how the land should be used, and that really stuck out to me.
I don't have a further question about that. I have another question. But
Okay.
Okay. My other question was about bike park, because I know in your multi-use plan, that was one of the items, but then further down in the numbers, it didn't look like there was a lot of agreement with regard to if it was supported or not in the latter category. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
I'd like to take that one. So I was super curious about that too, because it was explicitly in the multi-use concept, which was the overarching. But then the major use for a bike park literally got 47% if you look at the way the calculation was done. So I have to admit, since the videos of the process are public and online, I went back and looked at the videos. And again, none of us knew our little informal diagrams of land use were going to be public, but they are. And so we went through them, and 15 people of the, so all the delegates that did informal sketches, which I think was 18, 15 showed a bike park. And then one showed bike trails in a specific area, which you might construe to be a bike park, you might not. And then one person was open to whatever Parks and Rec said should happen, but it was Parks and Rec area. And then one person said no bike park. So I get that as 17-1, which when you look at the major use of the people who actually took a stand, said yes or no, it was 9-1. So that would be 90%. But we don't really know what the people who said either don't know or not enough information in that major use, what that meant. And we were talking about the process. It would have been neat if there was a second pass through that final vote, because then we could have, those folks, because everybody was pretty open to saying, hey, here's why I said that. And then it could have been, we need more information, or I don't like a bike park, or you got to promise me there'll be no lights, or whatever. But we didn't, unfortunately, that we were at the end of the window. Does that help? Yeah.
To also add, we were meeting previous to this one for a dry run, and we discussed that the potential that some folks didn't want to maybe vote twice for the same thing because they had seen bike park included in the multi-use concept that received the majority vote, and they might have been confused about voting again for the same thing when there might not have been a specific feature like a bike park broken out for additional voting.
I'd like to add that when voting, it was a point system. Agree, don't know, or disagree. And I think the discrepancy is owed a lot to the people who put their vote on don't know. Because our presenters, all of them very smart and prepared, got 6 minutes to tell us their idea. 6 minutes. I think a lot of those simply were, they just don't know what a bike park actually is. Those votes got no points. That was a neutral. That was a 0. And I think that the bike park as a specific entity suffered due to a lack of education, both in the community and on our delegation.
Thanks for giving me more context. I appreciate it.
Thanks for that nuance there.
I just want to follow up on that question. I'm just wondering if staff or one of the facilitators has comments on how the report was put together that kind of reflect, because it's in different sections, and just, was this just strictly the voting, or was the report put together in a certain way? Because I also had the same questions that Melanie did about this.
Yeah, so I can start that, and Grace with Healthy Democracy is also online if she wants to add to it. But so all of the concepts, major uses, and minor elements, those were all recommendations that were voted on individually by the delegates. And so part 1 has all of the recommendations that received 75% or more. And then part 2 are all the recommendations that didn't receive that 75% mark, but they all had the opportunity to vote on all of these recommendations that you see in your packet. And if Lauren or Grace want to chime in for more details.
Yeah, I can chime in here. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Babcock with Healthy Democracy. So we had all of the ideas broken down into concepts, major uses, and minor elements. And the example that we used was in home design. Something like a concept would be an open floor plan with 3 major uses. And a major element would be something like a kitchen and a dining room and a community seating area. And a minor element would be something that could fit in anywhere, like a local painting by an artist. And so we did vote on all of those items individually. And then at one point, the last day, we broke into groups, and the delegates worked on combining and removing duplicates within each of those categories. And I think that worked very well. We got rid of some of the duplicates within the concepts and within the major uses and within the minor elements. But as we see with the bike park, there's still some crossover and some confusion where a bike park was mentioned both as a concept and a major use. Does that make any sense?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Thank you for that additional clarification. I just want to echo everyone that has talked and said thank you. I think I have heard so many positive things, not only from other delegates, but from staff and the facilitators, just about the process and how refreshing it is for people to come together and to be able to talk and have differences, but then just to be able to talk through it, and just a lot of respect for everyone that participated. And so thank you so much for your time and your willingness to try something out new with us. And I'm just very excited and delighted about the process and how it went, and then to have you all come here and present to us about your experience and then your recommendation. One of the things I really like is that it's directive but not prescriptive, And I just think that it represents Fort Collins in such a great way. It has all the elements of Fort Collins. It's talking about nature, it's talking about expanding our natural areas, recreation, inclusion of Indigenous populations. To me, that's such a direction that the city is going in. And so just so great. I heard the best comment that if you walked into that room, you would say, that's Fort Collins. And so it's such a good representative sample. So I'm just really happy with the multi-use and just all the work that you did around this. I don't have any direct questions for you. I think my question is around, maybe if it's for city staff, about what, I'm just going to address that there's an elephant in the room, that there is another ballot petition going on right now, collecting signatures to have it be just one use, and you all are suggesting multi-use. So either your thoughts on that, and then I'm going to ask city staff just to give some options about what are the next steps available. So if you all want to start, if you feel comfortable talking about it.
One of the things, and I'm going to use an I statement here, but we can see if it's agreed, is we actually saw natural areas as a critical part of the multi-use, particularly connecting between Pine Ridge and Maxwell, because that helps with wildlife migration and also the bird fly-through. And so that was one of the places where we knew the other things were going on, and that didn't cause us to say, oh, we need natural area in it as some sort of we thought it was a good idea to start, but having that be a portion, and particularly, and again, up to city staff and the planning, but the western edge of the property. So I think that, to me, says we care about natural areas and how they fit in, but we also had a lot of space and the citizens have a lot of different interests. So we want to try and represent that. So
And can I speak too? Sorry about the delay. I had to figure out my camera here. There was something funky with it. But anyway, being also on this assembly, I also wanted to highlight that we also arrived at multi-use because it was this area, this piece of land is already altered. And a natural area, we understand the corridor connection as Peter just referenced, but knowing that there is a need within the city to want to do more with it, being that it is already altered, that there is some of the exposed concrete and cement or other building materials from the stadium that have been buried. It makes it, I think in our collective opinions, just a place where we can utilize this beyond just this concept of a pristine land that would cost a lot to restore back to its natural conditions and whatnot. And we also discussed the financial burden to one department within the city if it was to all just go back to the natural area program and to restore that. Yeah, there was a lot of budget discussion, finance discussion and whatnot also based on people's different backgrounds. Somebody would bring up something. So yeah, I just want to reiterate that this land is altered already and it's primed for multi-use.
Some other things that we considered are with regard to the cost. Thank you, Krista. That many of the groups that presented to us were committed to achieving their goals on their own funding. And they all shared the mutual goal of using their resources to rehabilitate the site. So saying that it can't be a natural area is not correct, as that group would like people to believe. It's actually a very high priority. And I'd also like to point out that a very high priority for the group is the priorities of the Indigenous group, particularly with 2 cottonwood trees that are on the site. It's very sacred to them. So giving that to just one entity, I think, is unfair to them. That was theirs to begin with. And that's important to us. I have in front of me the CSU land acknowledgement, and I can read it if y'all feel it's appropriate. But it essentially is an acknowledgement that land is the land of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute nations, among others. So because of that, the Indigenous people were a huge priority for us.
Anyone else on council?
I actually have that.
Do you want to keep going? Go ahead.
Yeah.
I had that. Yeah.
Just your follow-up question about what happens next. So I think there are a few options, a couple milestones coming up. So June 11th is the date when we'll know if the signatures have been gathered. Is that correct, Delynn? make sure I'm accurate.
It's when the petitions are due. We won't have the signatures checked yet, so we won't know if it's sufficient.
Okay, but within the next month or so, we'll know if that is happening or not. June 23rd was mentioned as the super issues meeting, so I would encourage us to wait until we get an opportunity for the boards and commissions to hear the information and also provide any input that they would like. Council could approve a resolution that would support what came out of the Civic Assembly or support it with modifications if you wanted, right, part or all of it. You could also, council could choose to send something to the ballot if you wanted to send something back to the voters as well, and that would need to occur by late August would be the deadline for council to do that.
Thank you.
I had a quick question for council. I talked to someone that was petitioning on behalf of that group, and they were also collecting signatures for the 2026 ballot. Is this going to go on for ever? Or is there a finite resolution after it's been put to the ballot if it is again this year? What would that, do you have an answer for what that would look like?
We did ask our attorney here, and she can come in with any specifics, but if we took the recommendations, if the council chose to, if we chose to pass an ordinance codifying or a resolution codifying the recommendation here, and the ballot initiative, if it gets the signatures, were to pass at the ballot, that would supersede the action of council. If they get the signatures and it goes to the ballot and council referred the recommendations, either whole in part or modified, to the ballot with the most votes wins. So that's what would happen in those cases. Does that help answer your question? There's nothing stopping anyone from running subsequent ballot initiatives. Did that answer you? Okay, that's a fantastic question. I had the same question myself. That's why I know the answer, because I was like, hey, what happens in it?
There's one other question that I might have heard in there, which has to do with the timing of the election. There are two initiative petitions circulating. One requests a regular election, one requests a special election. The charter language related to initiative petitions, though, does say that council must send the initiative to the next election that happens. So those are both on a schedule that would put them on the November 2025 ballot, even though one of them requests a special election.
Good questions. Yes, Susan.
A few questions about the bike park. As I was reading the information and so forth, I wondered what, as your committee was talking about the bike park, what did you envision? Can you give me a general, because I know each of you said that you might have had an idea, nobody could be definitive about it, but did you have a general idea in order to agree that it would be part of your multi-use?
Our group was made up of cycling enthusiasts and people who haven't ridden a bike in decades. I personally am quite familiar with bike parks. I know what they are and I know what they entail, and I have a pretty good idea of what they're talking about. There was a lot of back and forth, but again, I'll reiterate that I think a lot of that was due to lack of information. A lot of people see it as a wonderful asset for the community to practice their skills before they go up and do the big boy stuff in the Rockies. It's an attraction, but a lot of people are saying that it's not low impact. That's a high impact thing, and it's going to be a blight on the land and whatnot. They also committed to making sure that it fits in with the landscape in a fashion that is positive and not a blight. But we did have a lot of back and forth on that.
Let's see. I think that we know there's the bike park feasibility study, which we have the draft report of. And I think that speaks to some of the functionality. And also the bike park collective maybe made a presentation. And I think the research that they had done is probably a lot better. I've raced at Valmont, which is the bike park down in Boulder. That's 48 acres, and it seems huge when you're there. And that would be something. And the situation that the bike park collective put out would be to have a pump track area. So there'd be a small concentration of kind of hills and berms and things like that. And then there'd just be trails that would weave through part of the rest of the part. And if you looked at it from a drone, you'd see pretty much just scrub and hills. So there wouldn't be, and they were committed to no lights. So it wouldn't be nighttime, wouldn't be even lit like in the fall, winter when. So does that help?
Yeah, it does in part. And I do want to tell you that I really appreciate your commitment to keeping the no lights, to keeping the night sky. So important, I think, for wildlife, just for the serenity of the area. But so as I was reading it, it says that, let me see if I can go back to this one. The first thing that I was going to ask you, I was there for the first weekend, missed the second one. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have attended that. So I did hear all of the presentations. And as far to my knowledge, as I listened, the only presentation that had a feasibility study attached to it was the bike park. So my concern is, would that have, led people to believe, even though they may not have known it, just a subconscious thing, that they've already done the feasibility thing for the bike parks. So yeah, it is feasible for this particular property, and maybe lead the committee to believe that might have been one of the things to include in your multi-use.
I guess what I'd say is if there was a super professional, sales job is too harsh a word, but it would have been the Raptor Center. And they had no numbers, so they had no feasibility, but they had a very polished presentation that moved their project forward. I think the bike park presentation, even though there's the city-funded feasibility, the bike park folks were all about trying to fit in with whatever uses made sense on the site. So I guess I didn't. Now, again, I'm probably a bit of an advocate. I'm a cyclist and a competitive cyclist, but I think that was one of the things that was great. Lucy is not a cyclist, and she sees it. I'll let Lucy speak.
I was just going to add, speaking to my experience, to answer the first part of your question, I also understood a facility like a bike park to be a safe space for adaptive uses as well, for people of different mobility ranges to be outdoors and experience a facility like a bike park, as well as a safe place for children to keep them off mountain bike trails where there's more experienced riders that might zip by, and this is a place for all walks of life, all roles, all strolling. And Peter had mentioned, and that the presentation from the bike group mentioned it would be daylight use only, which was a key plus for me. But also taking into account where we live, and if we were in a swimming town and this site were in a more downtown or central location, and there was a feasibility study for a new swimming pool facility, I don't see why we would not put that forth for a multi-use recommendation for council. I think to acknowledge what the city has already spent money on for this feasibility study, and then also for the civic assembly process itself, I think it did inform me personally, yes, that this would be a good site for the bike park, but I think it would also need to take advantage of the natural topography. So putting the bike park in a spot where folks could use the mountainside effectively. I think there's a lot of different factors and considerations for building a facility like this one.
Oh, Krista?
Yeah, I agree with Lucy. I also want to reiterate, I think they've been advocating for years, and the feasibility study also helps them when they're looking at other sites, but knowing that right now this is the only site that is owned by the city, and that they were hoping that's to their advantage.
I'd also like to add, there's been talk, I want to bring to your attention some of the objections that we're hearing, that a bike park isn't compatible with a wildlife rehabilitation or a nature center. And it was recently brought to my attention that down just off of Ziegler, there is a raptor rehabilitation center. A bike path goes right by, no problem. The other thing is, the other sites that they are looking at do not offer the topography that is conducive to a successful bike park, and I'll put forth as an example the bike park that they put in at Berthoud, gets virtually zero attention because it's flat and it's hard to ride. And they put all that money into the wrong location, in my humble opinion, where this site is perfect for attracting cyclists, not just from town, but from other towns. And I own a local business and operate here in town, and good business is good business. So what are they going to do when they get off the bike track? They're going to go downtown, going to eat our food, drink our beer. I don't think that personally, and you guys see the numbers on the delegation, so I need to honor the numbers that you got from us as a delegation. But I think it's the perfect location. And they're saying there's so many other locations that they could use. They're all flat. They're going to all be hard to ride. They're not going to offer challenges that are going to allow people to build their skills so they don't get hurt when they're outside a cell phone signal. But yeah, I wanted to add that. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to be asking them general, as Colin just mentioned, from the delegation.
This is just to give my compliments to your vision, Lucy, of the bike park, because that's what I picture more of: adaptive, skill building, safe, all of those things. And so I guess what I'm having trouble with is I've also been to Belmont. It's monumental. It's huge. It's all about skill building. And I didn't see a whole lot of adaptability, and I didn't see a whole lot of other than pretty intense bike park use. So I guess I'm having a hard time aligning, which I really appreciate your comments, with the bike park that you might be mentioning, Colin. And so maybe and then I have no more questions. I just wanted to tell you that is a really beautiful view of it.
Kelly, did you have questions?
Thank you. Mostly a comment. I had no intention of saying a word tonight. Keep my powder dry on this particular issue till it's showtime. But so I wish I didn't have to say this. I'm leaning, as usual, I don't find myself in either camp. That's just the nature of my political existence. And tipping my hand a little bit, I lean toward using the property, not cramming every square foot with something, but for appropriate multi-use. But I have to say I'm a little troubled. And so before the vitriol comes in, I was one of the people proposing the bike feasibility study. So if this doesn't work out, we have other locations. I was the one that suggested funding the bike park in the next topic. So for the mountain bike people, keep that in mind, as well as the natural areas, providing the land for the trails. I'm slightly troubled, and I wish this hadn't come up, that 2 of the 3 spokespeople for the group happen to be mountain bike people. Is that wise from a policy standpoint? And I just assume this hadn't come up because I'm leaning in the multi-use direction. No, I'm there, but it seems a little biased to me.
So I can just jump in on how these folks were selected amongst themselves. So at the very end of the last day of that weekend, we did do a survey to ask all participants if they wanted to further participate in anything that the city would do with the Civic Assembly. So I sent out an email to everybody, and we had 7 people that said, sure, I would love to help put together this presentation and potentially present. So we met, all 7 of us met. And these were the folks that stepped up to say, I volunteer to give this presentation. So it wasn't who was advocating for what, because as they've mentioned, it is something where they are speaking on behalf of the delegation, not themselves. And you all can chime in if you want as well, but that was the process.
I'll chime in. Thank you, sir, for sharing your perspective. And I hear you, and I want to meet you in the middle. I don't know how to ride a bike personally, but I am married to a mountain biker. I went into this Civic Assembly experience completely blind, and we didn't know who would be presenting to us for one until day 1. And I think the presenters were selected randomly by an information committee, and then we received a handout with other presentation groups that were not selected for us to listen to, but just so we knew who all submitted for us to hear from. Just speculating, sitting here, I didn't even think about how we all were if you want to call it pro bike park, but that because we are a microcosm of the city, that might just be not majority, but a vocal interest group for a portion of the site. And lastly, to keep it brief, 165 acres is a large parcel of land. And when we all presented our draft multi-use maps, I think there was one single use. I can't remember one that was crammed with a bunch of different purposes. And I don't think I don't want that personally either. And I don't think that's what we envision for the future of the site as a whole.
I too want to thank you for your perspective. Some ideas that I've submitted actually probably make it look like I'm a real big mountain biker guy, but I'm not. I don't even have a mountain bike. A big portion of the discussion was not personal preference, what we feel the community would get behind. And the bike support or the bike park people have a ton of support. And like Peter pointed out in our rough sketches of our ideas for the site, nearly all of them included a bike park. But like Lucy said, none of them appeared to cram 165 acres with everything humanly possible. At the end of the day, the discussion was, what do the people of Fort Collins, what can they get behind? Enthusiast or not, that was the end all be all. Cyclist, enthusiast or not, we were trying to come up with what we thought our city wants to see, period. Full stop.
Yeah, and just for the record with you folks, these guys have heard it from me before. I'm pro bike park too. I want to get a bike park, or I wouldn't have supported and encouraged the feasibility study and the funding that we'll talk about later tonight. To me, it's where it's appropriately located, and I haven't formed that conclusion tonight, by the way, and appropriately designed and sized. That's really key to me. It just caught my attention. I literally didn't plan on saying anything tonight because there's more steps involved with council, and I didn't want to muck it up, but we'll have plenty of time to do that later. So thanks for your work. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the person on the screen and the other people that are here. And I was a skeptic, but I think it was a pretty good process. And I thank you very much.
Great. Julie had a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you. Also, add my appreciation. I was unable to attend either weekend, had other things going on, but also I have a different philosophy of something because I want to let you guys do your thing. And I'm so glad to hear your presentation. And thanks to council for asking these questions. I think I've learned a lot through your presentation, through the questions that are being asked. So I do have a question. I'll save it to the end because it doesn't actually have to do with this land in particular. But I do want to say I love how you described and how they were telling you to think about the how and not the who. That is so important. I know some may see this land as an either or, but I love that you present it as an and. It's this, and there is plenty of room. I don't think it will be crowded. I'm more excited about this than I have been about this land in the last, 5 years, if not 6. So I think to your some options, I do like the idea of a resolution approving. There seems so many different paths we could take here. So do you want to wait until after we know if the other ballot measure, if they get signatures before we make a recommendation? You're asking number 3, what are the next steps?
Yeah, I think that's up to council. If you want to wait to see if it's something that we should be putting on the ballot based on if there's another ballot question that's going to be on. And we should know that by the end of June. And then also June 23rd is the super issues meeting. So you'll also be able to hear what board and commissions potentially would recommend.
Yeah, as long as staff feels there's time.
Yeah, and I'll look to our city clerk, but we just need to get it on the ballot before August or by August. Yeah.
By end of August.
End of August. Okay.
And then we also have a placeholder on our 6-month planning calendar for August 12th for other items that need to be brought forward for the ballot.
Okay. All right. If you're confident, then I will be too. So then my question to the delegates, as you were going through this process, maybe in reflecting, I know that there were people that came to watch I heard some from another country, maybe even from other towns, just to see how this worked. What ideas came to you for when this might be a great process to apply to something that the city is facing, or maybe even outside of the city in your own business, whatever? Can you share a little bit about that?
Help me understand. So are you curious about how we felt about our experience and how effective it was?
And more about where could you see in the future the Civic Assembly experience being applied? Or not experience, but the process being applied.
I think, respecting that it was expensive, it would seem to me when you have an issue like this, which is pretty contentious, then the leverage of being willing or being able to get a random group of people that represent at least as well as possible the demographics of the city to come together. And maybe we got lucky, but I think it was great that people, like, there were certain people there that clearly they and I didn't agree on some of the important stuff, but then we talked about it and then we could ask each other questions. And so we were able to get past the tribal camp stuff. And so I think that would be my sense. It would be great if we could just do this for all of our issues, but I think that it could be that we learn enough with the Healthy Democracy mentoring, that we learn enough that maybe we could do it in smaller, less risky situations all by ourselves. But I would see it as really a worthwhile investment, like you all did invest in this, in a high risk or a high stakes kind of situation. Yeah.
I'd like to add that the process itself was the most democratic thing personally I've ever experienced. It was very effective. And the organization's Healthy Democracy, I know there were more than just Healthy Democracy in this, but in collaboration with an incredibly effective city staff. It was well managed, it was well planned, it was well run, and in a society where all of us they're trying to convince all of us that we can't get along. Political affiliation didn't come up one time, not from anybody. That wasn't the discussion. And I sincerely believe that is due to the effective planning put forth by city staff, Healthy Democracy. The process was smooth and I believe very effective. I'm with Peter. If you have a highly contentious issue or something like that, a lot of people are making claims that 20 people are speaking for the entire city. They didn't understand the demographic process and that we all represent a different walk in our city. And we didn't argue, we didn't fight, we heard each other, and this is the result. And I think we all stand behind it.
That's lovely. That makes me feel very optimistic. Thank you. Tricia had a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, like everyone else on council, for spending so much of your time. Weekends are very valuable to come together and to find common ground with other residents in the city. This has been an issue that's been contentious for years, so I appreciate your willingness to discuss this and find common ground there. I got to sit in on the last Sunday of this session, and I got to see the presentation of the maps. And I know everybody was worried about their artistic abilities, but it was really amazing to see how you each incorporated all those different elements into the park. And I do have to say that I came away with the thought that everyone appreciated the idea of a bike park being part of this space. So it was interesting when I saw the final report, how that came out. But I just want to say overall, it was really amazing to see how you all worked together and cooperated with one another and just came out of this with something really thoughtful. I just appreciate your work. So thank you.
Great. Melanie?
Yeah, piggybacking on that. And I want to assure our delegates that I truly believe that what you have presented to us is capturing the zeitgeist of what many people in this city want to see from that property. I do want to make sure, if we haven't already, have we gotten the results from the Future of Hughes survey as well? Because I have committed throughout that I would look at all the data, and I know we had a formal survey too. Have we already received that?
I don't think council has received it,
Okay.
but we can certainly bring that back to a work
Yeah.
session.
I just want to look at everything. I think that we've got a recommendation that I feel really confident in, and I just want to make sure that I'm looking at all of our data sources. So if that's something you could share, that'd be great.
And I can send it actually before a future work session. So yeah.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and it will be on our project page as well, so I can pull from there.
Perfect. I just think we have so many data sources for this, and it's wonderful. So yeah, and thank you guys for being perhaps the most robust source of data.
Do you have what you need, staff, to go forward? I think we do, based on your recommendation. Go ahead.
So I think it would be helpful, I just want to make sure
Go
I'm
ahead.
interpreting correctly from the questions of council, that there would be desire to schedule another work session to talk about some sort of formal action from council, whether that's a resolution or sending something to the ballot.
Do we need a work session, or does it just come to council where we discuss on the dais? I don't know.
We could probably do either way. I see Councilmember Olson
Kelly?
trying to get in here.
I like to have a work session, and I just had a couple other comments, but one relates to that work session that I think, first since we've heard about one particular element of it, and I've already outed myself tonight on the using it for more than one purpose thing, and we've all talked about the bike park, including me. But I just want to give a shout out to I hope we also end up with the wildlife organizations of various types and kinds as part of this project as well. I think that would be very important and designed properly in a Frank Lloyd Wright kind of way, or a new Western landscape very low. I think that would be very important to this project. My thoughts on it, if we put something on the ballot, we should have some guardrails on it and be as specific as we can without being too specific. And that's what the work session would be for to me. Put Project X to avoid any drama. Project X not to exceed a total footprint of so many acres project, and then doesn't have to be on the ballot, but give general guidelines to things so people know what they're voting on, because we don't need any more interpretation of ballot language. We just went through that from the last vote on this. And again, I don't mean dotting every single I and crossing every single T, but I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it increases the likelihood, if council feels strongly, 4, 5, 6, or 7 of us, to put something on, I believe it increases the likelihood of it passing. If we have guardrails on it, we have as much specificity as is realistic and mean something by the guardrails of not to exceed, those kinds of things. That's why I think a work sessions.
We'll recommend a work session, yeah.
And I would be open to that kind of discussion and open to that kind of ballot measure.
Great. So is everyone else nodding? Like, we'll do one more work session where we talk more specifically based on the recommendation. Okay. Does that help?
It does. And we'll take a look at the calendar. The latest that would occur is August 12th, depending on if we might have some flexibility to shuffle other things. We'd try for an earlier in July, just to give you all a little extra breathing room. So we will work on that.
I think the July date is something we should really strive for. Because if we end up recommending something to the ballot, it gives people a lead time to understand what's upcoming. Yeah. Okay, Council. So that wraps it up for this particular presentation. Thank you, Krista and Peter, Lucy, Colin, for volunteering to be volunteers of the volunteers and presenting the overall and speaking for the delegation as a whole. But I was also impressed when asked specifically, you felt very comfortable answering in your own words for yourself. And that's a great distinction to make in public policy. So I am very impressed, and I hope to see you, if not around town, at council, or I should have said it the other way, at council or on one of our boards or running for office, or at least around town at the grocery store.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you everybody else in the room. This was fun.
Appreciate you.
For sure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break so we can talk to the delegates if we want to.